Hi folks, welcome back to Special Interests with Bob and Donna. Today we're going to continue with our best serial killer novels series with part 3, and Bob is going to discuss the book that he wrote entitled Trace Evidence, a very fascinating case that, based on a fascinating case that occurred here on Long Island. So I'm going to leave it to Bob, and he will get into a lot of information, as you can see here.
Okay.
Go with it.
All right. Thank you, Donna. Well, as a quick follow-up, in that first part that we did, that we covered my first novel being Dickie, Richard, and I, followed by The Signing, followed by The Triumvirate, which completes the trilogy. And each book can stand by itself. In the second part that we did here, I wrote The Author. This is part of a 4-book series. The Teacher, Knots, and The Good Samaritans. Okay, so that completed the 4-book series referred to as a tetralogy. So we have a trilogy, tetralogy, and the focus will be now on Trace Evidence, a book by itself. It's not part of the 3 or the 4-book series. And then later on, we'll get into my last novel titled Battered. Okay, so the best thing that I did for myself in terms of fiction writing was to attend a serial killer trial here in Riverhead. And let's see, that trial began, 1998. And I'm going to jump way ahead here. I just want you to have a thumbnail sketch here. Robert Shulman, serial killer, was arrested on April 6, 1996. The trial began in 98. He received the death penalty, but that did not come to full fruition, and I'll touch on that momentarily. He died in prison in 2006 from undisclosed causes. So, I had spent every day as a spectator for a period of 15 months, 5 days a week, on this Robert Shulman serial killer trial. And interestingly, at the time, there were 2 other death penalty cases going on, same courtroom, that being the New York State Criminal Court building here in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. And let me just read briefly from my notes here. In the mid-90s, we had 3 death penalty cases in Suffolk County Criminal Court running concurrently. Robert Shulman, serial killer, first death penalty case on Long Island in a quarter of a century. Actually, it was 21 years at that point. By the time I put together a novel, we're talking almost a quarter of a century. And Robert Shulman was arrested for the murder of 5 women, 5 prostitutes. He was tried here in Riverhead for 3 of those 5. At the same time, we had Stephen Laval, killer of a 32-year-old teacher, raped and stabbed 73 times. Nicholson McCoy sodomized and murdered an employee at an Edwards supermarket here in the area. How do I feel? How does Bob Banfelder feel about the death penalty? I believe in the death penalty, but with a qualifier. You have to be absolutely sure, have to be absolutely positive. Beyond a reasonable, way beyond this reasonable doubt, we know that Colin Ferguson on the Long Island Railroad shot several people. We know that Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Thanks. Got it. Right. And Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, killed John F. Kennedy, or so say the history books. Several of us, many of us, have a different opinion as to who actually shot John F. Kennedy. But we won't get into these conspiracy theories, so on and so forth. We'll just stick with the facts that we know to be so. So during the trial, I was approached by one of the two defense attorneys, Billy Keyon, and he said to me, well, Bob, you talk about, the death penalty, and you say you have to be sure. How sure do you have to be? And as I just said a moment ago, without hesitation, usually I'm not quick on the uptake. I have to think about this, think about that. I answered, how sure? Colin Ferguson, sure. Jack Ruby, sure. As a matter of fact, I said, can I quote you on your feelings? And I had asked the other attorney. The other defense attorney was against the death penalty for religious reasons. Billy Keyon was for it. I wanted to quote him. He said, yes, go ahead. I went home that night and I wrote a piece for the Washington Post. And the next day I was approached immediately, if not sooner, by Billy, who said, no, I don't want you to print that. I said, okay, I'll respect that. I'm not going to, go do a 180 on that. So, also at trial, I was approached by the director of Kirby Forensic Psychiatric Center, Dr. Bruce David, Ward's Island, off Manhattan, to lecture on a case, which I considered a great honor. It was an unbelievable experience. Donna came along with me, and I gave a lecture to students and psychiatrists. Donna did not get the Cook's tour. I got the Cook's tour, and I was going through this labyrinth of doors, cells. It was something out of Silence of the Lambs. I swear it was very, very, very spooky. Subsequent to that, after the trial, again, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, but I want you to have a good picture of here how one thing leads into another. I said, well, I gave a lecture, not a talk, not an informal, I gave a formal lecture at Kirby. I'm going to try and get an interview with Detective Lieutenant John Garash, head of homicide, Suffolk County, sometime after the trial and sentencing. I sent letters, phone calls, I even sent the postcard so it would get attention. No response, no reply. And, I understand. But it is who you know. And I accidentally ran into someone who knew him pretty well and golfed with him. And he said to me, I'll get you that interview with John Garash. And everybody means well. They do try and help you out, but these things generally do not come to full fruition. So sometime later, I don't remember if it was weeks or months, but phone rings, I pick it up, and yes, this is, hello, this is Detective Lieutenant John Garash, homicide. Yeah, right, I said, and it was. Long story short, he invited me up. I waited downstairs for a while, and then I was escorted upstairs, And I walk into his office, I'm escorted into his office, and he gives me one of these. I've got about 10 minutes for you. 10 minutes became well over an hour, as I recall. And the man was gracious. I had a legal pad, 32 lines per sheet, and I had 3 sheets filled with questions, which he answered, all but 2, having to do with family, as I recall, or religion, or something like that. And at the end of this interview, he said, if I can be of help to you. I told him the premise of the book that I was writing, blah, 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 and he said, if I can be of help to you, you let me know. Man, it was really, really terrific. Some people said, in retrospect, I can't believe you got an interview with John Grush. I mean, he's not the type of person to just, invite you in. It just took somebody who knew me from a club that I belonged to, and, so that's how it flew. It's who you know. So, this death penalty that we're talking about was turned upside down because of 2 reasons. One is ostensible and one is actual. And I won't get into that because we're getting away from the focus of the book here, but I think that would be an interesting topic one day where we'll sit here and discuss the death penalty. How we might have a few people, some interesting people here, pro and con. Let's move ahead with this. Well, being a spectator as opposed to a juror at this trial for 15 months, I got to see and I got to hear things that the jury is not going to hear, that a juror is not going to hear. And that was a great advantage for me in terms of writing this novel. In one of the segments that we did here on these books, there were adages, if you will, that I'll just kind of cover quickly. Write what you know about and or research. And paint pictures with words. Don't tell me, show me. Paint pictures with words. And there's a third one that we'll deal with that is germane to what I'm trying to posit here, and that is use the what if approach. What if? Now, when the defense attorneys, Paul Gianelli, consummate criminal defense attorney, Billy Keyon, same consummate defense attorney, decided in what direction they were going to go to do what. What is the job of these attorneys, defense attorneys? And that is to create a reasonable doubt. Now, there was hardly any doubt in law enforcement's mind as to the room, the single room at 11 Glow Lane in Hicksville where Robert Shulman resided. And interestingly enough, his brother, Barry Shulman, lived upstairs from him. So you've got the Schulman Brothers, and one is accused of these horrific bludgeonings, murders of 3 victims here on Long Island, as I mentioned. Well, here's where that what if comes in. What if, well, let me back up a moment. What if I couldn't write this book or shouldn't write this book as nonfiction? I wanted to. here I spent 15 months. I covered this trial, and I sat next to a consummate reporter, probably one of the best reporters that you're going to find. And his name is, give me a second here, Andrew Smith. Andrew Smith was the staff writer for Newsday, and he covered this story every day. We sat next to each other most times for that 15-month period. And I turned to him at the end of trial and I said, Andrew, and I have a lot of respect for, his opinion. I said, Andrew, how should I write this? I didn't say, I want to write this as fiction. I said, Andrew, how should I write the story? And he said to me, without hesitation, fiction. And I said, why? Well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what it boiled down to, his advice to me as why I should write it as fiction was, Robert Shulman, he's your garden variety serial killer. He didn't use those words, but that's what everything boiled down to. This is my first trial, murder trial, if you will, serial killer trial, and it is horrific. There's no question about that. But Robert Shulman wasn't like a Ted Bundy. He wasn't like some of these other characters that I address. So I took his advice and I did the what if. Same as the attorneys did in the case. You want to create a reasonable doubt? So the attorneys pointed a finger of suspicion upstairs to Barry Shulman. Long and short of it, it didn't work out like that for the attorneys. There's no question of Robert Shulman's guilt. However, I went with the what if, and I said, what if I make it where Robert Shulman is the scapegoat and Barry Shulman is the perp? And that's what I did. However, the courtroom scenes regarding Robert Shulman are very, very accurate. The antics, now that's an interesting word that I'm using here, the antics that went on in the courtroom before the jury came in were unbelievable. Funny. Now, we're dealing with a very serious subject here, a very serious topic, serial killers. And yet there's some kibitzing before the jury comes in. Why? Tension release. Horrific. We're dealing with these horrific crimes. We've got forensic scientists coming in and testifying. We've got charts, we've got bludgeoning pictures, blood galore, horrible. But it's kind of like a MASH unit. And if you remember Alan Alda and MASH, there's a lot of kidding that went around surrounding these horrific scenes of people being brought into the operating room under horrendous conditions. So that's why the kibitzing. And just give you something mild. The two prosecutors were, one was Georgia Tshemba. She was the lead prosecutor, and her assistant, ADA Trish Brosco. 20 years, folks, so give me these names. Billy Keyon would break out into song when Georgia Tshemba came into the room again before the jurors came in. Singing Georgia on My Mind. It was as far as those antics went, it was the boys against the girls. Each of them held their own. If I was on the jury and not supposed to read newspaper accounts or anything like that, you begin to wonder, well, is this, maybe Robert Shulman is the scapegoat? Is this, it's amazing. But let me talk about research, the kind of research that I do. I could read the newspapers, and I did, and most of these articles are, if not all of them, are written by Andrew Smith, staff writer for Newsday. And I have many other articles, many other pieces. See how crazy this gets. Maybe, Donna, you could even home in on this. The top picture is the presiding judge on the Robert Shulman serial killer trial, Judge Arthur Pitts. This one hell of a nice guy, excellent judge, and below Arthur Pitts is Robert Shulman. Okay, you look at this character, a lot of serial killers, you wouldn't know. You could have a next door neighbor be a serial killer. A spree killer, a murderer like that, you know something's wrong, you look into the eyes and you say, this person's crazy. Serial killer will help you mend your fence. If you were a neighbor and maybe after several years feeling confident, said, listen, my wife and I are going out to a movie tonight. Could you watch the kids? Oh, sure. Yeah, that kind of confidence, that kind of assurance that you have that, everything is copacetic when it's not. More articles. I just want to show you just the research that went on here. And then these yellow legal, this is my notes through the 15 months of trial. Actually, it's just part of it. As is, I said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. I got the court transcript, and this is just part of it. I paid for this. They don't give you this. It's not a handout. There was another one or two, I believe, but we had a flood here, and that's when I learned to, put in a sump pump. Bob, people told me. So I lost two of these, but most of this has to do with the opening statements by one of my heroes, if you will, Detective White. Detective White testified on a stand for approximately 31 days, as I recall. It was like a month. And this is just Detective White's testimony. And how they got a handle on Robert Shulman and Barry Shulman was that gumshoe detective work, just following up with a lead and interviewing prostitutes in the Hollis area in Manhattan until one day he learns that the prostitutes remember this fellow who had a blue Cadillac, and it started like that. I don't want to ruin the book, so I'm not going to give you too much information, but what you'll follow in terms of the apprehension and what led to it is just astounding. I think you'll really enjoy this novel. All right, so as Andrew Smith advised me, it's not that sensational as it is in your mind, so Bob, write it as nonfiction. But what do I have to do then? I have to create a bit of embellishment. Okay, I'm getting a signal here from Donna. What?
Fiction, not nonfiction.
Oh, nonfiction, but what did I say? Okay, nonfiction. I needed a bit of embellishment, so I created a character to give you just that. What happened with Schulman during interrogation, Robert Shulman is in the interrogation room in Yaphank, police headquarters in Yaphank. That's the euphemism, the euphemism is interview room. This is the interrogation room, and it is an 8 by 8 foot room that they'll wear you down, they being the police. The police are not supposed to use coercion, but they can use chicanery. They can use trickery. There are themes that the police may present, such as, Robert, these prostitutes that you killed, we understand perfectly. I mean, you got to rid the world of these people. That's a theme that they'll use. Perhaps they'll use sleep deprivation. Perhaps they'll use, to a point, food deprivation. They will wear you down and get this confession from you. Was the confession coerced from Robert Shulman, or did he volunteer, as the police said on a stand, that he volunteered this information? Well, that's in this gray area, but I cover it pretty thoroughly. And I did a lot of homework, and I got a hold of some interesting facts that went on, to the point that one of the homicide detectives supposedly, allegedly now, purportedly, misrepresented himself as Robert Schulman's lawyer. Robert Shulman thought he had a lawyer. Again, chicanery, trickery, whatever it takes. I have no problem with this, because at this point, most of us know that that room, Robert Schulman's room at 11 Glow Lane, was the crime scene. Many splatters of blood in that room, even after Robert Shulman had cleaned up. You don't clean up well when forensics comes in and they have the equipment to determine the blood. The blood came from this one victim. There were like 23, there was 33. Blotches of blood. Well, let's see. I buried some of my things that I wanted to excerpt from, but I'll just touch on one. One of the forensic scientists on the stand was, I think it was the third one, spoke about DNA and the possibility that this blood could have belonged to someone else. We're not talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, not even millions. We're talking about the chances of being somebody, we're talking in the billions, if memory serves me correctly. Regarding one victim, it was something like 59 billion. Another one was 1 out of 19 billion. Just believe me, if it wasn't Robert Shulman, it was Robert Shulman in that room. But it was Robert Shulman. But again, as the attorneys did, they had to go with something to create a reasonable doubt. Robert's room, after forensics got through with that, Georgia Tashemba, the ADA lead, who eventually went on to become a judge, I'd like to mention here, she referred to that room as a slaughterhouse after forensics collected their evidence. Interestingly enough, they say there are no coincidences. After I finish up with the second part of my novels that we did, I'm preparing for the third. Robert Shulman, Trace Evidence. I'm preparing for this talk that I'm giving you here, and Donna calls me in after dinner and she said, "You'll never believe who you got an email from." It was Glenn Hall, the forensic scientist that I'm telling you about. He came out of the woodwork. He said, "I remember you, blah, blah, blah." And I emailed him back, "Of course I remember you." Going back 20 years, there's things I remember vividly about this trial, and there's many things that I depend on my notes after 2 decades. Speaking about DNA, in that 4-book series that I covered, we went over this pretty thoroughly without giving too much away, knots. If you want a crash course in DNA, not being facetious here, what I try to do is take a very, very complicated subject and simplify it so that you will understand. I think you'll find when you see how this is addressed, you'll find it highly entertaining and highly educational. And I have to thank some people like Glenn Hall for this and some of the other forensics scientists. In the book, as a matter of fact, I write acknowledgements. I give credit where credit is due. My acknowledgements for the people who helped me with this book: 2 full pages. 2 full pages. It was unbelievable the help that people gave me. As a matter of fact, during those 15 months, I felt I was treated as a team, not only by the prosecution, but by the defense, by many of the peripheral players. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I don't want to give anything really away. I want you to read the book, and I think you'll find it fascinating. Donna, is there anything you want to add? You want to come from behind the camera? Come on, hon.
Well, you can imagine that the conversations that we used to have at dinner were quite interesting after he'd spent a whole day at trial.
Why don't you tell them the day you went in?
Oh, and there was one day, I'm retired now, so it's okay, I can't be fired. I took a day off from work, and Bob said, "Well, why don't you come with me?" I said, "Okay, fine. I'm very interested in abnormal psychology. I took courses in college, and
Straight A student.
And I minored in psychology. So I said, "Oh, sure, this is going to be really, really good." So the one day that I go in, it's the medical examiner who's testifying, and the testifying is not bad enough, but they had to put pictures up of these poor women that were victimized by this monster, Robert Shulman. But I have to tell you, even though this is trace evidence is written as fiction, the courtroom scenes and many of the happenings that occurred during their testifying, and how they caught this guy.
I had mentioned that, but I'm glad you're reinforcing that. Outside of a bit of embellishment by creating another character to give it some pizzazz.
Pizzazz, yes. But if you are into the Criminal Minds, if you watch Criminal Minds on TV, which I love to watch, this book is for you, as are the other books that Bob has written that he mentioned prior to. So there anything else you want to?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to belabor it. We'll
Okay.
move
Well,
on
I
to.
have to tell you that to reiterate, I have to brag about my my other half here. That he is an award-winning author, and he really does research, as you can see from all the papers and everything else. And I would really love for you to read the book, comment on the book if you do decide to read it, and if you want to continue with the series, we will be continuing with some more of Bob's books, so you can stay tuned. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, Special Interests with Bob and Donna. And we not only write books and read books, we do fishing and hunting and all that other stuff, so we'll be getting into other special interests. Thank you for watching, folks. Have a great day.